prevalence of the statement "to our knowledge" and similar paraphrases in current and past biomedical literature. To my knowledge, it's the only presentation of its type.
Well, technically, this was supposed to be the actual title, but it was too meta, probably. So, to our knowledge, yes, this is the first study on
Oh.
the prevalence of to our knowledge. So, yeah, thank you very much. And as most research starts, this research started with an upset from our side. We presented a study, and soon thereafter, another paper was published in our field. And what happened is that they used a statement which you can see highlighted in the slide. To the author's knowledge, this is the first published study describing something something. And so at the time, that was 2019, we wrote a letter to the journal, and we explained how on author's knowledge might not be a sufficient source of information for deciding if something is novel or not. And, we are all experienced scientists here, and you all read a lot of papers. And so you have read probably many times statements like, to our knowledge, this is the first time that we did this and that. And there are, in our opinion, issues with this statement, and particularly the lack of reproducibility. It's impossible to know what is my knowledge. I might be, just starting into a new field and might have very little knowledge on meta research, or I may have been working on meta research for tens of years. So my other knowledge may be very vast. In the other side, these statements lack a little bit of accountability. So whenever I'm saying, oh, to my knowledge, this has never been described, I'm also sort of justifying myself in saying, well, if I was wrong, it was just my knowledge. We normally don't accept that people writing methods of paper, something like, to my knowledge, the cell culture wasn't disrupted by any other problems, right? But we accept it in other areas of the paper. So already in 1979, someone wrote a letter on JAMA, and what they concluded is that much more informative will be a declaration disclosing the sources of the best knowledge and what are the limits of the bibliographic research. So based on these, we made a very small and much less scientific study than the ones we have seen during this session, just looking at the semantics of these terminology and looking at particularly what was the prevalence of the statement of to our knowledge in the current biomedical literature and in the past 75 years. What are the frequency of these statements in specific papers, the characteristics, location of the statement, and then finally to assess the prevalence of this statement after we implemented an editorial intervention in 2 veterinary journals for this problem. So in order to start, it took a while to decide how to do this study because we couldn't find an effective way for looking for these statements using just conventional databases. Finally, we resorted to PubMed Central using the phrase searching option that PubMed Central has. So basically, PubMed Central doesn't allow for adjacent searching, but at least it has a list of actual phrases that will be searched inside papers. And to our luck, there are 2 statements, particularly to our knowledge, as you can see on the first image on this slide, and to the best of our knowledge, and the second section of the slide that can be searched through the advanced search builder on PubMed Central. Then we had to decide what journals to look for, and while I thought at the beginning these I was particularly concerned for smaller journals, I was interested to see also what was happening in leading medical journal. We had some inclusion criteria for leading medical journals, so the 6 journals highlighted in red were included in that category. And we looked at specific time periods between 1950 and 2020, and then from 2020 to 2024 to the end of 2024 to have a current update on this issue. And then finally, in our study, what we did is that to try to find a solution for this, and not a randomized solution, unfortunately, but we did provide to all the authors that submitted papers to our journals a statement like the following. You can see here, the following databases have been searched with the following keywords, the following textbooks have been consulted, and no other reports of these have been found doing these searches. Whenever authors were mentioning something like, to our knowledge, this was the first time that. We did check what was the accuracy of the search strategy in a subset of papers published in the Lancet. So we manually looked, opened all the papers, and then we looked at the presence of the statement, and then we calculated, we compared that with our automatic search. And you can see the results of these search strategy. We had a good specificity, but relatively low sensitivity, only 67%. So whenever you are listening to the results in this lecture, keep in mind that we may have missed some of these statements. So these are the main results. First of all, what was the prevalence of a statement like, to our knowledge or to our best knowledge, in the current leading medical journals? Of 4,500 articles that were available on PubMed Central in the last 5 years for this journal, you can see that about 22% of them mentioned to our knowledge. And you can see there is a vast disparity in the actual proportion of these statements per journal. You can see, for example, that PLOS Medicine was almost half of the papers mentioned this sort of statement, while in the New England Journal of Medicine, only 1% of the paper mentioned this kind of statement. And these are just a couple of examples of these statements in medical journals. It's hard to read, but yeah, basically, to our knowledge, this was the first time that something happened, or to our knowledge, hypothermia trials have not been performed in infants presenting after 6 hours. Now, in terms of how this sentence changed over time, in the 1950 to 2020 period, a prevalence of these statement was about 0.6 higher in medical than all the other journals, while in the current literature, the prevalence increased up to 6% in medical compared to all the other journals. You can see all journals are like on the right, and you can see so that in all PubMed Central journals, about 5 million, 16% of them mention to our knowledge, compared to 22%. And over time, there has been actually an increase in the use of this statement rather than a decrease. And if you are curious to see like what a 1948 paper would look like when they mention to our knowledge, this is what it looked like, and it's pretty much exactly the same as today. They say something about these as never has been reported to our knowledge. So where, to our knowledge, is reported and how many times in a single paper, and what we did for that, was it effective at all? In terms of frequency, there are about 1 out of 3 papers that reported 1 time, and then other papers that reported more time. There is 1 article on the Lancet that reported it 5 times through the article, so they had a lot of knowledge. And then in terms of where it's located, in the Lancet, it was located mostly in these boxes, though sometimes in the discussion and also in the introduction, and in some cases in the abstract. In 9 and 1 article, the words best and others were also included in addition to our knowledge. And finally, to look at what happened to the journals that I edited and applied this intervention, it seemed that the intervention that we applied was able to reduce the number of, to our knowledge, statements from 35% to about 7.6%. Still, some authors really feel more comfortable including that statement, and it's hard to get completely rid of it. In terms of limitations of the study, we have a lot of limitations, and some of these are going to become goals for the next, part of our research. We only looked at the articles published on PubMed Central. I don't see necessarily how this could be a source of bias, but I'm sure someone smarter than me can highlight that. In terms of differentiation between article types, we couldn't distinguish between research, review, or opinion at this stage. We might do that later on. As mentioned earlier, the sensitivity of our search, it's 67%. And so that's, that means that there is likely a higher proportion of articles that actually reports this statement. And we are working to actually extract a much larger sample of articles and mining with code through them. And finally, of course, the solution that we have provided is, not a randomized control trial. So there may be a lot of other confounding factors that cause the decrease in the use of this statement in the journal over time. So in conclusion, we found that statements that include, to our knowledge, have been relatively prevalent in the biomedical literature for the past 70 years. And we suggest that perhaps as a group, we should look a little bit more thoroughly at the value of this statement and whether it is subjective or not. We found that different medical journals have different prevalence of to our knowledge. And so perhaps this suggests that the use of to our knowledge can be editorial dependent. And maybe if we had science-wide policies that established about this, we could have a more consistent reporting of this statement or not reporting of it. We found that suggesting others of using a scoping search decreased the use of to our knowledge. And so if deemed appropriate, this could be an intervention that could be applied by other journals. And sort of like to conclude, like we do think that changing statements like, to our knowledge, this is the first time that we'd, based on the literature search outlined before or later in the paper, this is the first time that would provide a slightly more objective way of starting papers. And I would like to thank my co-authors and happy to take all the questions.
Thank you very much. So first question is from the internet.
Yeah, unusual. So Pertti Salahamo from the Finnish Medical Journal is asking for details on the editorial intervention that reduced the incidence.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, sorry, we didn't have a lot of time or slides. So the editorial intervention basically was we screened all the articles that were submitted. An editor screened all the articles that were submitted, and if there was mentioned, to our knowledge, then that statement that was mentioned in one slide earlier would be sent to the authors, indicating, hey, we advise to remove that statement and use this statement instead.
Great. And just to follow up, Colin Grabarek from ACC is asking, was it just removal of the statement or were there other revisions, for example, inclusion of a systematic search?
So we didn't physically remove the statement. We asked the authors to do so by using the scoping search instead.
Thank you.
So we're going to have to be very efficient. We only have about 6 minutes for the 6 questions. So we'll start here, but quick.
Nihar Shah, Carnegie Mellon University. In my mind, to our knowledge implicitly means that, we did a reasonable job of searching and based on whatever we are citing, it's the first thing. So implicitly, at least it's the same thing, but I guess you're saying make it explicit.
Yes, it's a semantic problem. Make it, instead of using a subjective statement, when you say, to my knowledge, I did this, I would like to see objective statement where I explain exactly what has been searched and based on the literature search then.
Is that a Pandora's box? Because I use a million things to search. I use like 5 different LLMs to search with so many different prompts and so many different search terms. Like, what do you want me to specify? Like, I'll probably write 5 pages on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it depends a lot on the sort of like field that you work on. I feel like in the medical field, it is really important that if, any sort of study is done, you are 100% sure that you know what has been done before, or 99.9, right? And so like looking on a paper in which they randomized the babies to different treatments, reading that they write that to their knowledge, this is the first time that it was done. Well, as a potential patient, that would be perhaps upsetting for me. I would want to make sure that they looked for all the published or gray literature. And this can also be adapted depending on the journal, right? If you, you can have different level of systematic searches.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say in RCTs, I and Karen Robinson did a paper on this about 10 years ago, where we documented that the vast majority of RCTs that had many prior RCTs did not acknowledge that they were there, and a healthy percentage said that they were the first. But I want to read the first sentence of our discussion, which says, "To our knowledge, this study is the first attempt to assess those citations." So we're not guilty, but in RCTs, this is a big, big problem. So right here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gunter Eisenbach. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Medical Internet Research. For the past 26 years, I've probably contributed to this pollution of the literature with this phrase, because whenever I see a priority claim by an author, and that's quite common that they say this is the first study to do X, I advise them either rephrase this as to our knowledge, or cite a systematic review, or at least tell me like what search terms you used, right? So I gave them these three options, and still a lot of authors choose to like stick with this subjective statement. And I actually don't think there's anything wrong with the statement. So that's kind of, I want to challenge you, like what is actually wrong with the statement? It indicates subjectivity. As an editor, my role is to make clear to the reader what is objective and what is subjective. And if it's clear that it's a subjective statement, then I've done my job as an editor, I think. So I have a bit of difficulties to understand what is actually wrong with this phrase, because you cite accountability, but if the author says to our knowledge, they take accountability. Somebody else can then say, okay, you were wrong, your knowledge was wrong.
We have to get to the answer.
That's no, that I love that. Like, this is exactly the point, and I think it may help me get my point better across. So first of all, when I started, I was writing to the author's knowledge everywhere, just so we're all on the same page, right? So, and I don't think necessarily this is pollution, but I do think that we are giving ourselves a little bit of a slack on a part of the paper that is as important as the methods of the paper. Again, you would not accept an author to say, to my knowledge, no one has tampered with my cell cultures overnight, right? They're gonna write, the cell cultures have been done like this and that, right? And instead, we accept that that authors perhaps don't do all the legwork of proving that that's the best possible literature search that is fully described. That's the first time that they are describing something like that. It's also absolutely fine to remove the statement that say it's the first time, but in my opinion, and in the opinion of the people that I work with, it's much better to include a scoping search in every single paper, so it's very clear what has been searched and what the people that was doing the study knew before doing the study. And if this is done at a protocol time and not when you're writing actually the paper, then people may find different studies and may make their study even better. And so I think it can help sort of like remove the subjectivity on the moment that people is writing that.
So thank you. So we're technically at time. We'll just be able to take one more. I'm so sorry, Ioana.
John Iskander, Public Health Reports. Thanks for a very practical study. With regard to the interventional portion, you noted that there were, I think, 7% who still didn't make the change. In your sense, are they being driven by habit? Are they being driven by lack of access to searches? What is the motivation? Or are they simply trying to be at a note of caution? What is the motivation?
It's a good question. I don't have a scientific answer to that because we didn't look exactly and we didn't, survey the others. But in my opinion, still there is some resistance to describe clearly the search strategies that people have used to find papers related to their papers. So mostly like resistance to describe the search strategy.
Thank you.